Not even the crew of U-47 knew where they were headed until hours before they arrived. The order to discard their Enigma machine suggested it wasn't anywhere good. When they were finally briefed by Captain Günther Prien, disbelief rippled through the submarine. They were to infiltrate Scapa Flow, the heart of the Royal Navy. A fortress of sunken blockships, patrolling destroyers, and minefields so defended, U-18 had been ensnared and captured in minutes when it tried to infiltrate years before. And now, by 1939, Scapa Flow was even more impenetrable. The plan hinged on exploiting an unusually high tide that night, their only chance to clear the enormous boom cables barring the entrance. But as U-47 crept toward the narrow gap, a screeching metallic scrape tore through the hull. They'd hit the cable. Worse, they were stuck, immobilized in enemy waters, with no way to signal home. Yet Captain Prien remained calm. He had accounted for every contingency, even this one. Karl Dönitz had a problem. A war to decide the fate of Europe had just begun, and he knew Germany's survival hinged on choking Britain's lifelines. For the Admiral, the answer was simple: U-boats. If it were up to him, shipyards would churn out submarines by the hundreds, thousands even. He'd flood the seas with them. No matter how large British battleships were, they could never protect merchant ships from what they could not see. But it wasn't up to him. Hitler couldn't see it. They had their uses, sure, but they were secondary. The Führer dreamed of titanic battleships and grand fleets. He wanted a navy that could rival the Royal Navy and go toe-to-toe with it. Dönitz thought it was madness. There wasn't time. Germany would never outbuild or outgun Britain's surface fleet. Not in time for it to matter. If Germany was going to win, it had to do it below the waves. He needed to prove it. And he had an idea, a gamble. A single act could change everything if it worked. It would be reckless, audacious. But if it succeeded, Hitler would have no choice but to see the truth. For that, he needed Günther Prien. Prien was the best skipper Dönitz had. Just weeks into the war, the man had already sunk 3 British merchant ships, earning the Iron Cross second class. He was fearless, skilled, and a natural ace. When they met, Dönitz didn't waste time. He leaned in and asked, "Do you think that a determined commander could get his U-boat inside Scapa Flow and attack the enemy naval forces lying there?" Prien grinned incredulously. Scapa Flow was the nerve center of the Royal Navy, the heart of its home fleet. Everyone knew it was impenetrable. Blockships choked its approaches. Minefields and boom cables sealed the waters. Gun batteries and searchlights lined the shores. Destroyers patrolled day and night, and anti-aircraft guns kept the skies locked down. Surely Dönitz was joking. But Dönitz was not smiling. He told Prien he had evidence of a possible way in. Dönitz slid him the file and told him to take 3 days to think it over. He made sure Prien knew that whatever he decided, his standing in the Kriegsmarine would remain untarnished. It was the perfect gamble. If Prien pulled it off, the shockwave would ripple across Britain, proving that U-boats were the future of the Kriegsmarine. And if he failed, Dönitz would only lose 1 submarine. Hitler wouldn't even notice. Prien didn't need 3 days. He returned the next morning. It was not only possible, he would gladly do it. It started with a German merchant captain, an observant man with a keen eye for detail. While passing near Kirk Sound, the northernmost entrance to Scapa Flow, he noticed something unusual, a gap in the line of sunken blockships. Not large, but large enough. When Dönitz learned of it, he immediately ordered Luftwaffe reconnaissance to confirm the report. The photographs didn't lie. A 17-meter-wide hole cut through the defenses like a gash. No searchlights, no lookouts. A gaping wound in the Royal Navy's fortress. It was an oversight so shocking it felt like a gift. The gap was likely strung with boom cables, but those could be navigated above or below, by a skipper with enough nerve and skill. Prien was that skipper. The attack was planned for the night of October 13th, 1939. High tide would raise the waters just enough for U-47 to glide over the cables. The mission was so secret that not even German radio operators were entrusted with it. Every briefing was given face-to-face, a precaution to avoid Allied interception. U-47 was stripped of its Enigma machine and communications equipment. If captured, no critical technology would fall into enemy hands. This was all or nothing. On October 8, 1939, Prien took U-47 out of Kiel with its crew of 44. To them, this was just another routine patrol. None suspected they were on their way to strike at the heart of the Royal Navy. As the submarine slipped through the Kiel Canal into the North Sea, it hugged the British coastline, evading detection as it pushed north. Only on the night of October 12th, with Scapa Flow just a few miles away, did Prien gather his crew. In the cramped, dimly lit hull of the submarine, he revealed their true mission. They weren't just hunting merchant ships. This was something far bigger. If they succeeded, it could shift the balance of the entire war. Inside Scapa Flow lay the cream of Britain's fleet. Battleships like HMS Nelson and HMS Rodney, the battlecruiser HMS Hood, and even the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal. U-47 had 14 torpedoes just for them. Sinking just one would shatter the illusion of British invincibility, turning the phony war into something far more real. By the evening of October 14th, U-47 had arrived. Prien stood on the conning tower, scanning the entrance with his cold, calculating eyes. There were no signs of patrols. He took a breath, steadying himself. It was time. He gave the order. A 17-meter gap might seem easy to navigate in broad daylight, but under the cloak of a moonless night, it was an entirely different story. The faint glow of the aurora borealis streaked the sky above, casting an eerie light on the dark waters. For Prien, slipping U-47 through the gap was like threading a needle blindfolded. At first, everything seemed to be going according to plan. The submarine moved slowly, cautiously, its engines humming low. Then, without warning, a deafening metallic screech tore through the night. The sound reverberated through the steel hull, freezing every man aboard. They had hit the boom cable. The tide hadn't been high enough to clear it. Panic swept through the cramped quarters. Prien barked orders, commanding the crew to reverse the engines at full power. The motors strained and roared, but it was no use. U-47 was snagged, stuck. Inside, the tension was suffocating. The men knew what this meant. No Enigma machine, no radio, no help. If they couldn't free themselves, they would sit there helpless until a British patrol or RAF bomber spotted them. And then it would be over. Prien climbed to the conning tower, his breath heavy in the cold night air. As he scanned the horizon, his stomach dropped. In the distance, headlights appeared on a coastal road. The beam of light swung across the water and landed on U-47. Prien's pulse quickened. This was it. The mission, his crew, everything. They'd been caught. But the car passed without stopping. The driver hadn't noticed the submarine. Prien swallowed hard and turned back to his men. There was still a chance. He knew what to do. They'd taken on water in the ballast tanks earlier to keep their approach steady. Now, that extra weight might be their salvation. He ordered the crew to vent the tanks. Slowly, the water drained. With it, the U-47 began to rise, straining against the cable. Then came another loud metallic groan, a vibration that rattled every bolt in the hull. And just like that, they were free. Prien's voice cut through the tension, a hushed whisper filled with relief. "We are inside." The submarine glided forward into the vast, dark expanse of Scapa Flow. Prien's eyes scanned the harbor, expecting to see rows of massive warships silhouetted against the horizon. But there was nothing, just empty, silent waters. The home fleet wasn't home. Frustration coursed through the crew of U-47 like an open wound. How could this be? After all the risk, after threading the needle into Scapa Flow, had they truly come all this way for nothing? Prien refused to accept it. There had to be a target, something. He pushed deeper into the sound, his every nerve screaming at the risk they were taking. Every second in the anchorage was another second closer to detection, capture, and worse. The home fleet had evacuated Scapa Flow. A massive task force of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers was on a mission in the North Sea, while the rest had sailed south on rumors of a possible German air raid. For a moment, it seemed like Prien's daring gamble had turned into a bitter waste. Then he saw it. In the distance, the silhouette of a battleship. His pulse quickened. The HMS Royal Oak. It was not an ideal target, an aging relic from another era with limited strategic value compared to Britain's modern warships, but it was still a battleship. Sinking it would deal a psychological blow to the British and show the world that nowhere, not even Scapa Flow, was safe. The Royal Oak was here for one reason only. Mechanical failures had forced her to turn back when the rest of the fleet departed. Now she lay alone, unaware that she was living on borrowed time. Prien's voice was steady but charged with urgency as he called for 4 torpedoes to be fired. Each firing sent a slight pitch through the U-boat as the weapons launched into the cold, dark water. The crew waited in tense silence, counting the seconds it would take for the torpedoes to travel the 4,000 yards to their target. Then, nothing. A muted explosion barely rocked the ship. One torpedo misfired, while the others failed to detonate or exploded harmlessly near the anchor chain. Prien cursed under his breath. The Royal Oak remained unscathed. No alarms, no searchlights, no destroyers roaring to life. The British had written off the disturbance as nothing more than a snapped anchor cable. Determined, Prien maneuvered the U-47 and fired 2 more torpedoes from the stern tubes. Again, failure. He clenched his fists and put distance between his boat and the target to cool off and reload. By now, it was after midnight. Every wasted minute chipped away at their chances of escape. There wouldn't be another. The next shots had to count. Shortly after 1 a.m., Prien fired again, a spread of 3 torpedoes. This time, the results were devastating. All 3 hit, ripping gaping holes below the waterline of the battleship's starboard side. Within moments, the Royal Oak began to list as seawater flooded her compartments. Then came the fire. The cordite magazines ignited, sending colossal towers of flame into the night sky. Metal shards and debris rained down as if the ship itself were being torn apart from the inside. In minutes, it was over. The Royal Oak rolled onto her side, her 15-inch guns snapping free and plunging into the depths. Sailors scrambled across the decks, diving into the frigid waters in desperation. Hundreds more, trapped below, never made it out. Around 800 British sailors perished in those freezing waters. Prien described the sight to his crew. He's finished. The triumph was short-lived. U-47 turned for Kirk Sound at full speed, but even on the surface, the submarine could only manage 17 knots, too slow to outrun the Royal Navy's destroyers. Within hours, depth charges rained down, the sea erupting in violent shockwaves. Every explosion shook the hull and rattled the nerves of the men inside. When 2 British destroyers caught up off the Scottish coast, Prien crash-dived. The crew sat in suffocating silence on the seafloor, ears ringing with the relentless ping of ASTIC sonar and the dull, gut-churning thuds of depth charges. For hours, the destroyers hunted them, the explosions creeping ever closer. Slowly, the sonar pings faded. The propellers grew faint. And finally, silence. Cautiously, Prien surfaced. The sea was barren, not a ship in sight. Against all odds, somehow, they had survived. When U-47 docked in Wilhelmshaven, the crew was met with cheering crowds. Dönitz himself came aboard, beaming with pride, followed by his superior, Erich Raeder. Both men personally congratulated the crew, assuring them they were heroes of the German Reich. But the real surprise came from Hitler. The Führer was ecstatic, so much so that he sent his private plane to bring Prien and his men to Berlin for a hero's welcome. In the Reich Chancellery, Prien stood before Hitler, who personally awarded him the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, the first U-boat commander to receive it. The entire crew joined him for a celebratory lunch, where they were hailed as pioneers of Germany's naval resurgence. That evening, they were the special guests of Joseph Goebbels at the Wintergarten Theater, treated to a spectacle fit for heroes. Overnight, Günther Prien became a national icon. The sinking of HMS Royal Oak electrified the German public at a time when many of them still remained uneasy about plunging into another war against Britain and France. Prien's boldness and skill were exactly the kind of triumph the Nazi regime needed to rally morale and stoke patriotic fervor. Scapa Flow had been breached. A German submarine had infiltrated what was considered the most secure naval base in the world. The loss of nearly 800 sailors, many of them young recruits, shocked the British public and revealed a glaring vulnerability in their defenses. Strategically, the sinking of the Royal Oak didn't cripple Britain's naval power, as the lost battleship was not pivotal to Britain's naval efforts. But its symbolic impact was enormous. It exposed cracks in British naval supremacy, humiliated the Admiralty, and highlighted the audacity of German U-boats. Dönitz's gamble had paid off. He might not have gotten the thousands of U-boats he wanted, but Hitler was definitely sold on the idea.